Namibians will head to the polls on Wednesday, the 27th day of November 2024, to cast their votes for the presidential candidate and members of the National Assembly of their choice. The Electoral Commission of Namibia, the ECN, recorded a 91% turnout in the recently concluded general registration of voters. A very good evening and a warm welcome to this episode of Talk of the Nation. I'm your host, Denver Kisting, alongside Madam Joyce Ricoro, our sign language interpreter for this episode. Now, the Southern African Development Community Electoral Advisory Council has described Namibia's recently concluded general registration of voters as smooth and successful. With about 3 months to go, we ask this question this evening: what progress has the ECN made, and how ready are we for Wednesday, the 27th day of November 2024. And to help us unpack these important matters, we've invited a distinguished panel. Mr. David Saluka is responsible for corporate communications at the Electoral Commission of Namibia. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening, and good evening to the viewers.
Also joining us this evening, Mr. Janolo Nosep, Communications Officer at the Namibia Institute of Democracy. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening, Denver. It's good to be here.
We're also honored this evening to have invited Dr. Marius Kudumo, who is a public policy and international relations analyst. Good evening to you, Doc, and welcome back in person to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me.
We're also very grateful that a very important constituency is well represented this evening. Madame Donna Gamatan is a youth activist, and she's representing that important constituency. Evening, ma'am, and welcome back to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening, Deborah. Thank you for having me.
Are you well on this gift of a Monday?
Yes, I'm well. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well too, thank you. Mrs. Luka, let's get into it. A lot has happened. A lot is scheduled to happen as we prepare for Wednesday, the 27th day of November 2024. Talk to us about the state of readiness, the state of preparedness on the part of the ECN.
Well, thank you, Denver. You know, as a commission, we launched the electoral calendar on the 7th of March, and that is a yardstick that then guides us in terms of the activities that we'll be carrying out to the polls. We are currently in the pre-election phase, and one of the activities of the pre-election phase was the general registration of voters, which we started on the 3rd of June to the 1st of August. And one can say we have successfully conducted that by reaching a 91% of total registration of voters. And that is a good gesture for a country in terms of democracy, and because it represents at least over 90% of the population. Now, what
eligible
follows,
to vote.
Eligible to vote. Yeah, what follows then is that we have demobilized our teams. On top of that, we have also demobilized our equipment. We have received all our registration equipment that were deployed both locally and internationally. And now what we are doing is we are busy uploading data, the registration data to the central server. After that process, then we start running that data into what we call the automated fingerprint identification system. It's a system that we use to segregate data. Then after data segregation, then we go into the production of the provisional voters register. And then only then we'll be able to know, okay, in terms of registration, the gender, the race, and those people with disabilities, you know.
And also settling the age.
And settling the age.
Thank you for the overview. I'm sure we'll get into more particulars during the course of our conversation this evening. Just before we proceed, is a 91% turnout of those eligible to vote the only measure of success of a general registration of voters process?
It's one of the critical success of the, but also if you look at the equipment or the system that we have rolled out in terms of registration, it's one of the systems that has been commended not only locally, but also internationally on the basis of it being efficient in terms of capturing of the much needed data to ensure integrity of the registration of the voter registration system. Now, you see, one of the features of the registration kits that we deployed this time is that it uses fingerprints as identification, it uses your face as identification, it also uses your ID number as an identification. So in a case where your ID number is not correctly captured, your fingerprints must be correctly captured and they must match with the data that is on the system. And this is really to ensure the integrity of the whole system.
Thank you.
Yes.
So what's the stance of the NID, of the progress made thus far, but also how ready we are seeing that this very important democratic process is only 3 months away?
Okay, you see, NID, as civil society, it is not only our duty to be watchdogs, you know, of processes like this, but also to aid where we can. And that is why through a variety of the projects that we currently have ongoing, such as the Namibia Needs Me and the EduLink project, we have done our part as NID in terms of voter education. Currently, we also have another project going on where we are educating learners and students in terms of what voting means and why it is important for them to go to the polls, you know. So as an institution, we don't only want to criticize government or, you know, parastatals in that regard or state institutions, but we also have done our part to sort of aid the process so that there is voter education done enough to prepare people for the polls, because 91% is good. But again, if people don't vote, it won't mean anything. So at the end of the day, as civil society, we have positioned ourselves to assist in that regard.
What is different this time around? Because, you know, efforts have been underway every 5 years to ensure that those who do turn out to register also make it to the polls, yet we see that they don't turn out.
All right. One thing that we also got from our constituents was that the message of voter education does not come through ways that are easy for us to consume. So not only have we gone out of our way to create infographics, but we have organized more events. We have organized what we call edu circles, where we just speak to young unemployed youth in communities and talk to them about, you know, their votes, their rights, their responsibilities, and things like that. And of course, we have used platforms like TikTok so that in 30 seconds you learn the importance of voting, the purposes of the ECN, you know, things like that. So we have tried to be creative in terms of putting out that message, whether it was getting influencers to do it or whether it was organizing a civic education activation in a mall, if you can call it that. So we've sort of put out, as an institution now, different ways through which we can conduct voter education that we believe are appealing to young people.
Thank you. At the end of the day, the proof of the pudding lies in the eating.
Lies in the eating,
So we'll have to wait and see whether those efforts will yield the desired results. Yeah. Dr. Kudumo, if we were to juxtapose Namibia in 1989 versus Namibia in 2024, firstly as far as voter registration is concerned, but also in terms of the involvement of democracy against the backdrop of the important work that the ECN not only does, but also certainly is supposed to do?
I think the 1989 elections took place under a specific context. It was about death in life, independence and freedom, or slavery forever. Therefore, it was not a lot of work in mobilizing everyone to vote. First to register, actually teaching them how to vote and why they are voting. That's why we had a voter turnout of 97%. Now, you are 34 years after independence. There are different needs, there are different aspirations. People are beginning sometimes to doubt whether their aspirations and their hopes will be met or not. But basically, a democracy is sustained by the citizens. We need to encourage citizens to actively participate in the political process. But basically what I'm saying is we have not reached that level of turnout that we had in 1989. And I think it's important for us also to emphasize that voting is not an end in itself. Our constitution talks about we are voting to influence government policies and also with the expectation that our material and living conditions will improve. But obviously, I think we have sustained democracy, but we can do more, especially in terms of convincing every citizen that it is a responsibility to participate in the democratic process.
As far as voter education is concerned, Doctor, do you believe that citizens realize that by not actively participating in these processes, they are in fact casting a vote? Whether or not you are disillusioned, whether or not you feel disenfranchised, the fact is, if you don't participate, that is a vote.
Yes, I don't think so. I don't think that we are doing enough, and I think it is a collective responsibility. I don't think that it's only the Electoral Commission that is supposed to be responsible for continuous voter education and citizenry education about what it means to be a citizen. Like you are saying, in a multi-party democracy, it's about choices. If you are not voting, the others will decide for you. There must be someone out there that you think can meet your expectations.
And the results will stand whether or not you show up at the polls.
Yes, because I don't think we are doing enough in our education system, both formal and informal, and in the other platforms to explain what it is all about and why do we vote. It's not a mechanic process. It has value.
Thank you, Doctor. Madam, there are various perceptions about young people, some fair, some certainly not fair. One such perception is that young people love comfort and they can't endure any form of inconvenience. Also, as far as the democratic processes are concerned, so if there's no indication that this process will aid me as a young person, I'm certainly not interested. Is that particular perspective a fair one from your take?
I think that particular perception and narrative, I think, is unfair. Gen Z and the young people of this era are very vocal, and the constant narrative that young people don't like to be inconvenienced or young people don't like to sit in discomfort is not necessarily true, because young people have shown that even in the midst of discomfort, they continue to air sentiments that speak to what we need and where we stand as young people in terms of democracy, in terms of where democracy is concerned.
Wherein lies the proof of that activism actually translating into real results? Because it's one thing to be vocal, which I think many will concur young people in fact are, but it's something else to wake up on a public holiday, which the 27th of November will be, to go and stand in the queue possibly and cast your vote and make an actual difference. Or resorting to social media in the palm of your hand and being vocal there. To what end?
I think also it's a collective effort to get young people to the polling stations. How things were done before are not how things should be done now. There's a different method and a different way of getting young people to the polling stations. The voter registration period really is testament to the fact that collectively, we should go back to the drawing board to ask ourselves if indeed the turn-up of young people for voters registration was low. What can we do then to bring young people to the polling stations? For example, the Namibia Institute of Democracy have gone out of their way to get the message across to young people in order to bring young people to the polling stations. Now we should go back to the drawing board to ask ourselves, if this is the method they've used, how can we mimic that effort so that young people then come to the polling stations? Because it's one thing to say that young people should go and vote, and it's something different to then sit in and say strategically, young people consume information this way. How do we bring young people to the polling stations? Yes.
Mrs. Luka, we do know that there were also efforts on the part of the ECN to involve this important constituency. Talk to us about that strategic intervention and also the responsibility that the ECN does have to educate voters and prospective voters throughout.
You know, the Electoral Act of 2014 mandates the ECN to conduct voter and civic education. And we actually have a division responsible for voter and civic education. So what we have done is on this 7th of March, when we launched the electoral calendar, we also launched a voter and civic education campaign. Now, our theme for the general registration of voter was Step Up, Register to Vote. And we have deployed or employed various channels that were targeted at various segments of the society. And one of the key issues that we then considered was, in order to entice them, let's try peer-to-peer. So we then employed youth ambassadors across the 121, across the 121 constituencies. And these youth ambassadors, we also employed, on top of that, we employed the lead youth ambassador, who was the former Miss Teen Namibia, Oriana Ribeiro. And they carried messages that were really targeted at the youth. We also had engaged them through their social medias. Now, what we have done is that in the next round of the voter and civic education, the campaign continues, but then the theme changes. And this time our theme will be put your voice in the box. And we have really, from the general registration of voters, we also try to assess where did we lack, how was our message. So we are trying to tailor-make these messages in order to entice the youth to, it's one thing to register as a voter, but what is more important is for you to go stand in the queue and cast your vote. So,
on a public holiday.
On a public holiday.
Yes, that needs to be added. It needs to be added. Before we proceed, Mrs. Luka, I think one elephant in the room that we need to get rid of as soon as possible is, for those who may have rested on their laurels, who missed the cut-off date of the 1st of August 2024, who are still hoping and praying for supplementary registration of voters. Talk to us about that very briefly.
Well, unfortunately, we are not going to be conducting the supplementary registration of voters for this election cycle. Due to some legal requirements, we also need to comply. And we have also made it very clear when we, at the beginning until the end, we said we're not going to conduct supplementary registration of voters. And the registration of voters in Namibia is unfortunately only when you are 18 years, and you can prove that. So there are those...
During registration.
During registration.
Yeah. So whether or not you turn 18 subsequent to registration prior to polling day, you may only register when you're already 18.
When there's registration and when it's 18, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. What do you make of the manner in which the ECN has been able, or otherwise, depending on your perspective, to comply with the dates as set out in the calendar that was launched, as Mr. Luka just reminded us, on the 7th of March 2024?
Okay, if we are talking about key activities in terms of their calendar, we think they have, of course, meet their objectives. But of course, if they keep up with that good work until we get to the ballot, then that will be great. But, as for us as NID, again, and I think that is what we should stress the most, is that we do not just want to be those that say, oh, no, young people don't do this, what are that. We actually go out in the field and talk to people and try to hear and understand from people, why is it that you don't vote? And a lot of the reasons we get, Denver, because sometimes you hear them and then you're like, okay, I hear and I understand you, you may be right, but still, if you don't vote, you are still voting. If you don't vote, you have still made a decision, or rather you have allowed somebody else to make a decision for you. So as an institute, we have really gone to the ground, whether it is a university dialogue event, where we gathered over 200 students in the hall, speak to them about their rights, their responsibilities, importance of voting, importance of being an active citizen and things like that. We really try to, and this is also us, supporting ECN as a fellow custodian of civic and voter education in the country, is that yes, we come up with programs and projects that we believe are able to reach young people in a way that we feel is best appealing to them. But of course, as for the commission and their timing, that is something that we have tried to assist in terms of voter education, in terms of whatnot. But I know that in terms of their calendar, they have kept to the core dates.
Do you believe that they should have started earlier so that there was a possibility to, in fact, allow for supplementary registration of voters?
Yes, and this is also another challenge.
You're saying you should have started earlier?
Yes.
I just want to
Yes,
make that
said you
clear.
should have started earlier because I know that it's called an election cycle for a reason. Because I know that they came, look, all fire blazing during this year. But throughout the years, you know, after the elections, it goes down a bit. The commission, it looks as if they are not doing anything. But that shouldn't be the case. Voter education should continue. Civic education should continue. Maybe not at this intensity, probably because of funds. I don't know. But what we know is that there is more effort needed from the commission side in terms of voter and civic education prior to elections or prior to election year.
Thank you so much. Doctor, you shared with us that in 1989 we saw in excess of 90% of those eligible to vote register, and more than 90% of those who had registered turn up and out at polling day. And one has to add, this is way before the existence of social media that now is used as a tool to lure people, perhaps with varied success. What Mr. Nosip just explained to us is that in terms of projects, in terms of processes, in terms of programs, it's targeted for a specific election. But is it your sense that perhaps we're treating an election as if it's the first one every single time?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is more that we need to do in the country, just basically about the Constitution. What are the values, what are the principles of the Namibian Constitution? The people that we elect, why are we electing them? And what is it? Remember, they take an oath. How do we keep them accountable to the oath that they have taken? We must remember that in a democracy, voting is about limiting the powers of those that we are voting for, meaning we need to keep them accountable.
I think you need to say that again, Doc, and you need to say it slowly, because I think that needs to sink in.
In a constitutional democracy, voting in electing is about limiting the powers of those that we elect, because human beings have the tendency to abuse their powers. Therefore, we are electing you and keeping you accountable. After 5 years, we go back to elections. If we are not satisfied, we vote someone else. That's why you cannot stay away, because there's always an opportunity for you to correct whatever is not going right.
Yeah.
The problem is the constitution. You see, you can have a constitution without constitutionalism. In other words, the citizens must internalize the constitution, the values, the principles, and also their powers. They must know that they have the powers. Therefore, it cannot be just voter education before election, then we are quiet.
But how do we go about that, Doctor? How do we make sure that Namibians sufficiently internalize the supreme law of the land as an actual living document that is there for their benefit and for their well-being?
So, for example, in our education system, you have formal and informal education. So teaching does not only take place in the formal settings. The social media that we are talking about, the media, the meetings in communities, we must use those platforms for people to understand. So that democracy and voting is not a mechanical process, but it's something that we are using to arrive at whatever we want to arrive. For example, you look at the principal state policy in Namibia. How many people are aware of this? So I think education system plays an important role for citizens to know why are we doing what we are doing.
Thank you.
And what are the consequences if you are an elected representatives and you don't do what you are supposed to do. We vote you out. That's why we have these chances.
Thank you. But in all fairness, in defense of young people, if I'm an 18-year-old still living with my parents, they pay for the roof over my head, they feed me daily, they pay for school fees if that's relevant at all, they pay for my transport. I have a carefree life. Why should I vote? I would want to know. because what it seems that you guys are talking about is out there. It's not directly relevant to me from my perspective as an 18-year-old young person. What would you say to such a human being?
I think what I would say to an 18-year-old with such reasoning is, I would say that as young people, we are very vocal. And when we are that vocal, we need to put action to what we actually say. Yes, you are living at your parents' house. Yes, they are responsible for you. But at a certain point in time, you might have to leave your parents' house. Also, regardless of the fact that you are living with your parent or not, indirectly, whether you are going to vote or whether you are not going to vote, it affects you. Like the colleague from NI, from the Namibia Institute of Democracy said, if you vote, you've made a choice. If you don't vote, you haven't made a choice. So regardless of the fact that you live with your parents or not, it indirectly sort of also affects you. Yes.
Dr. Kudumo says that we may not have sufficiently internalized the Constitution and the rights particularly that we have within the supreme law of the land. Is it your observation that young people care about the Constitution, that they know the Constitution, that they've internalized it sufficiently?
I think also we should look at the fact that, yes, we have a Constitution in place. The question is, do young people know that they have that constitutional right? Yes, young people do know, but then we need to speak to the young people in the language they understand best. Yes.
What does that mean?
I think if we put something in black and white, a young person will be able to read what that is in black and white. But how do we transfer the message that's in black and white on paper to this young person is what I'm trying to aim at.
Are you calling for the supreme law of the land to be translated into young people's lingo?
Not necessarily to be translated, to be
Lated?
Yes, in young people's lingo, but I think we should put effort into the translation of the message.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, so Denver NID, we are at a space where we say the purpose of civic education for now is what we call civic repositioning, where we simply ask young people, they say, what traits must you have as a young person to create a healthy democracy, to contribute to your democracy? And part of those traits is actually reading your constitution, understanding it, internalizing it, like Doctor said, amongst, paying your taxes, staying away from crime, not drinking and driving, all those other things. So as NID, and that has been our ideology, civic repositioning. Look at yourself and then look at the characters that you need to be able to contribute to your country. And that is why we also look at a lot of young people say, I know my rights, good, fine. But you know that every right comes with a responsibility. The right that came with getting registered to vote comes with the responsibility to actually go and vote, So we have like this infographic and also some reels on our Instagram where we tell you this is your right. And of course, this right comes with a corresponding responsibility, because we know that there's somewhat a general understanding of rights, but of course the translation thereof is lacking. So we have taken the initiative to also educate them about that. Yeah.
And there's no single right that's absolute, not even the right to life.
Not even the right to life, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Should you want to participate in this evening's very important conversation, if you have a question for one of the esteemed panelists, the number to dial in Windhoek is 061 291 3339. 061 291 3339. Please switch off your television set or move away from it to avoid any confusion. Keep your contributions, your questions, your interventions brief, to the point, and always respectful. So speaking about the responsibility to vote, is it your sense, and we won't say it's the sense of the NID, we're asking you specifically, that we should legislate the right to vote? People should be forced through statute, through legislation, to vote.
All right. So because we live in a democracy, it would not work. Because that is the beauty of a democracy, and that is why it's called democracy, because you have freedom of choice. I think often as young people, we don't appreciate that choice enough, but we unfortunately cannot force people to vote, but we should do whatever is needed to encourage people to go to the polls.
Would that constitute guided democracy, Doctor?
No, I don't think that we need to force people to vote. And many times people talk about voter apathy, but sometimes it's a conscious decision of people not to go and vote. And there are reasons for that. But in the context of people having rights and responsibilities, citizens must realize it is an obligation, it's a duty. to
Although it's
go
not a
and
legal
vote.
duty.
Although not a legal duty.
I'm happy you're touching, one moment, Mr. Luka, I'm happy you're touching on voter apathy, Doctor. It's something that is difficult to grasp, why someone would, despite their attitude, go and register to vote, but then not go vote. What do you attribute that apathy to?
No, it's not apathy. I don't call it apathy. Sometimes it's apathy, but it's a conscious decision sometimes not to vote. You see, we vote because there are expectations after voting. When I'm looking at the message and the strategies and the convincing for me to stand up and go and vote, if I don't find it
I won't go.
amongst the political parties, so why must I vote?
Thank you, Doctor. Just park that thought for a moment. We have Chris from Katima Molilo in the Zambezi region on the line. Good evening. Good evening, Chris. If you are able to hear us, please go ahead. Hopefully, Chris will call back 061 291 339 061 291 339. Yes, Mr. Saluka.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the statement that the panelists were saying. You see, as a commission, we have also, with the responsibility to ensure that we continuously conduct civic education, we have rolled out the continuous civic education in the year 2022, which then is a continuous exercise that is conducted at a constituency level, regional level, as well as a community level. So we have employed voter education officers in all the 121 constituencies, deploy them, and then they go from village to village, house to house to sensitize the public.
Just
on
one
their
moment.
civic
Is there
duties.
quality control involved? How does one gauge the quality of the message that they deliver? How do we know as a commission what is it that these folks who've been employed, who are being paid, who are now deployed
Yes.
to villages and constituencies all across the country and elsewhere, that they do what they're supposed to do?
Yes, we have what we call the voter and civic education policy in place, and that guides the strategies and the messages that the voter education officers need to adhere to.
That may be in place.
And
How
then
do we
we
ensure
also-
that they actually comply with it?
Yeah, and then they also, on a monthly basis, are supposed to submit their reports on the number of voter education service education sessions that they have conducted, and there we have a target, annual target of voter and civic education that we need to reach, and the target is to ensure that in your constituency you reach at least all the communities in your constituencies within that specific reporting period. Yes.
You were very vocal, it seems, about this process.
Yes.
But you know, it's one thing to have the tool, something else for the tool to be effective. What do you make of that?
I think the ECN should put more effort into cooperating with civil society, because we are also on the ground. And truth be told, I want to believe that, well, of course not this year.
So, please park that thought for a brief moment.
All right.
We have John from the Namibian capital on the line. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, John.
Yes, my contribution to the show is just that it's materially being disputed that it's a citizen's duty or responsibility to vote. You cannot give me 34 years since independence, and then we have a whole surging number of unemployment. And so now out of a sudden, we came out of, let me say, we came out of elections where it has been a repeated thing of promises, no delivery, and out of a sudden becomes now my duty, my responsibility, just to vote and ensure that the 81-year-old or 71-year-old pensioner is going to go back in that
John,
seat.
you need to provide more context. Are you saying it's not your responsibility as a citizen of this country to participate in the elections?
What I'm saying, it should not. They should not say it is a responsibility and duty. They should not make it at the duties of citizens to vote, because they failed the same citizens. How do you fail me And then from there, you just turn around and you
John,
decide
just one
if
moment.
my region must go vote for you.
John, we hear you. How do you understand a constitutional democracy if you're saying that it shouldn't be your duty
Democracy,
and your responsibility to vote?
democracy works. We go with what majority. If we decide we want gay people or we don't want them, whatever the majority says, we have to democratically vote on that. We go with what the majority says.
Thank
That's
you for your
why if we
contribution
are,
this evening, John.
yes, it's the same way if we are voting for someone.
Thank you very much.
We go with whoever.
Doctor, I'd like you to tackle this question. So if we're saying that if the majority decides not to vote, not to even register to vote, whatever it is that we say the majority decides, is that how we understand a constitutional democracy particularly? If we're saying we should not be told that it's our duty to participate in the democratic process as citizens in a constitutional democracy, what is it that we're actually saying?
Look, I want to touch on the voter, what the caller have said. If you are not satisfied with the political parties or the individuals that are there because they are making promises that they are not fulfilling, why are you not standing up and be counted yourself to make the change that you want? That's the good thing about constitutional democracy, that everyone in terms of our constitution have the right to peacefully participate in political activities, including formation of political parties. So if we are tired with promises, then you must step up and fulfill those promises. That's why I was saying that you can't take the voters for granted that they will just follow what you are saying. That's why your message and your strategies must be convincing that they will address the issues that people are facing. But you can't sit down because you are not satisfied. You must provide the alternative to what you are not satisfied with.
Thank you, Doctor. We have Jonah from Khobabis on the line. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So I would like also to contribute in the program.
Please go ahead.
Say again?
Please go ahead.
Yes. I want just to speak about what I'm seeing or experiencing during the voters' registration. So I think there is a lot of political fatigue whereby the voters, they are not willing to vote. And through what I have assessed from myself, most of those who don't want to vote is due to insufficient service delivery on those that they had voted. And I think also some of them, they really don't know why they have to vote for. I think maybe before they enroll the registration for voting, the civic education should be done ahead of any action for the election.
Jonah? Jonah?
Yes.
Can I challenge you?
Yes.
So more than 91% of those who were allowed to registered.
Say again?
More than 91% of those who were allowed to register to ultimately vote did register. What do you make of that figure? How does that relate to your observation that people did not turn out to register to ultimately vote?
I'm really struggling to get your question.
Very well. Thank you for your contribution. Let's hear what the panel has to say about your contribution.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I'd like to hear your take on it. You know, the fact is, whether we think it's sufficient and whether we believe nothing will happen on polling day, that no single person from 91% of those eligible to vote who had registered will turn out. The fact is 91% did turn out to register to vote. That should already tell us something.
I think 91%, we shouldn't downplay the 91% because there are some countries where you don't even get 91% of people who've registered to vote. So 91% is a very great figure in terms of where we are at. My sentiments just, and I remain, we shouldn't downplay the 91%. Maybe it's not the 97 or the 98% back then in unprecedented times, but 91% right now speaks to how important democracy is within our country, and those that have turned out to register to vote feel about democracy within their country.
Very well, Mr. Suluka. And it's not the 27th of November yet. Yes, a lot still needs to be done, and we can't predict the future.
Exactly.
But 91% of those eligible to vote registered.
Yes.
Right.
You see, I want to echo the sentiment by Doctor to say the responsibility doesn't lie solely with the Electoral Commission of Namibia.
Or with the NID.
Or with
Please
the
give Mr.
NID.
Nosep a bit of
Yes.
credit as well.
It is, it is a civic duty. It's every citizen's responsibility to ensure that you first entice those who are negative about going to polls, and then you take them along, encourage them, inform them, and you know, like the other speakers have already said, we need to inform our electorate on why they have to go and vote. And that has been clearly made clear. Why do you have to go and vote?
Just one moment, Mr. Suluka. We have our last caller, Arno from Rundu in Kavango East on the line. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, Arno.
Yes, I would like to pose a question to Mr. David.
Suluka, please go ahead.
I consider, yes, Mr. David, yes, whom I consider to be an agent of ECN, and I would like also perhaps Doctor to share with us his opinion on this.
Please
question.
go ahead, Arno.
Yes.
Please ask your question.
Okay, Mr. David, you are sitting there on behalf of ECN. I would like to know, people we are calling today as stateless people, your organization has been registering these people to vote while they are not Namibians. Don't you think you just have been doing some kind of damage to our democracy? And if it's that the case, what are you going to do in order to compensate for the damage that you did?
Arno, thank you very much. Just before we let you go, Arno, are you in possession of documentary evidence of this allegation that you're making?
Yes.
Have you submitted those to the? Have you submitted the evidence to the authorities?
I have come across people who are having voters registration cards, and this
Thank you very much.
Can I speak?
Yes. Have you presented this to the Namibian police, Arno?
Say it again.
Have you presented the evidence that you claim you have to the Namibian police?
Since it was not really that time an interest of taking ECN.
You didn't
to
submit
court
it to the
because-
Namibian police. Let's hear what
because-
Mr. Suluka
because
has to
these
say.
These people are having voters registration cards. A lot of them, I think Mr. Devet is well aware of this. A
Thank
lot
you
of
so
them
much,
are having
Arno.
this voters registration cards, but they don't have Namibian documents.
Thank you so much, Arno.
That they are not Namibian.
Thank you. We are in a serious race against time.
Yes.
Arno is of the view
Maybe,
that you
yeah.
are aware of non-Namibians whom you are registering to participate in the democratic process on Wednesday, the 27th of November.
Yes.
What's your take, sir?
Well, thank you. You know, our registration requirements are very clear. Only Namibian citizens are supposed to be registered. And like he said, he doesn't have evidence to prove, but
He
the
said he's
commission-
aware. He said he
Yes,
hasn't
he's
submitted
aware.
the evidence to the Namibian police. That's in
Yes.
fact what he said.
So what happens is that within the electoral activities, as a commission, we have given a period to object. So the voters register, provisional voters register is going to be released on the 29th of August, both in the government gazette, and it will be made available actually even on our website probably.
And then Arno may object.
And then Mr. Arno can go in the voters register. If you feel that there is a name that is contained in the voters register, that you have evidence that, of course, this one is not a Namibian, you object, you take your objection to the electoral tribunal, the electoral tribunal will hear your case, and then if your objection is approved, the person is removed.
Thank you.
That's why we have that period for the electorate to object.
Thank you very much. Madam, your final thoughts this evening, sorry.
I think I just want us to refrain from the narrative that young people are only vocal on social media. Young people are not only vocal on social media. Young people don't only gravitate towards things that they benefit in. Regardless of comfort or discomfort, young people, despite the fact that they might be vocal, also put some action to that. Right now, we don't sit with statistics in terms of the number of young people that registered, but in general, not just with registrations, in general as a country, when we want young people at the table, we should go to the drawing board in terms of how do we attract young people to the table where we have discussions such as these, and we should be very strategic as well.
KAOS.
KAOS.
Yeah. Doc, your final thoughts this evening, please?
My view is that democracy is sustained by the citizens, and citizens have rights and obligations. And we don't just vote as a mechanical process. We vote with the expectation that our conditions will improve. And we have opportunities to make choices, different choices, if we are convinced that there is a better alternative. That is the good thing about democracy.
And if we are not convinced that there's a better alternative, as you put it?
Then you stand in yourself and be an alternative.
Mpandu Nene, Doctor. Say your final thoughts, please.
I think I'll say that, because I'm also speaking as a young person, I'm far from 30, is that it is very important. It is very important that as young people, we do not see voting or being part of political activities as, oh, I'm not for politics, you know. It has nothing to do with that, but it has everything to do with you making a contribution to your country, everything to do with you making a contribution to your community. Whether the contribution is through voting, whether the contribution is through writing a letter to your councillor or organizing a cleaning campaign. And that's what young people sometimes don't see. They just see what whoever is not doing, what political party A or B is not doing. But they never see, but okay, it's fine. What can I do? What role can I play? And how can I contribute? And that is honestly the kind of patriotic mindset that we try to instill in young people as NID.
Okay, Kangans.
Thank you.
So you have the final word this evening.
Well, thank you. 27 November is the day, and we just want to encourage Namibians. The voters card that we have are not just documents. It's a document that will help you to put your voice in your box by making your voice heard. So this is your last chance that you have to put your voice to your choice. The other thing that I just want to reiterate on is that we are approaching the most critical period of the election period, and this is where citizen journalism comes to play. So let's ensure that we disseminate information that is accurate, that is verified, in order to ensure that we really promote our country as a democratic country, matured democratic country.
Lutumezi. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. Thank you for sharing your expertise, your learned views. Thank you for your service to the Namibian nation.
Until next time.
I do hope all of us are registered voters.
We are.
Yeah. The proof of the pudding lies in the eating. We should have asked for proof. Thank you very much. And that draws to a close this episode of Talk of the Nation. Good night.